Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.
Good morning, viewers. Welcome to Jaipur Dialogue USA. To begin with, I must apologize for the delay that has happened today. 8 minutes is way too long, and there was some technical issue, and we apologize. I sincerely apologize, and let's start. The first thing is about the housekeeping part of it. I want to express my deepest gratitude to all the subscribers for allowing Jaipur Dialogue USA to cross 10,000 subscribers. Thank you. Thank you for your support in a rather short time with only one show per week. And I'm happy to announce and share with you that we are going to expand the shows and more of them in the US prime time. And it will happen rather soon. So looking forward to that interaction and sharing more on this subject matter. So please like, subscribe, share, and let the world know that we are here. So thank you very much for supporting us. Today's topic is a very interesting one from my point of view, and I think the world wants to know about it. Is the ideology of Islam compatible with democracies the way it is being practiced around the world? And to discuss this matter, I have greatest of pleasure in welcoming Robert Spencer. Robert runs a news channel called Jihad Watch. And if you ever wanted to know what is happening in the Islamic world, that is a place to visit, because you will see incredible things reported out there which the mainstream media doesn't cover. The mainstream media only likes to sanction, suspend people who speak truthfully and vocally. One such example was Rand Paul, whose YouTube channel was censored, or he was asked to drop certain things from there. With that in mind, let's talk about democracy. And Robert, one of the things that we know that democracy is like a life itself. It's an adjusting to the shifting paradigm of change and modernity. That's what happens. Democracy has started as many years ago. Today we are seeing a different kind of democracy, and it is part of a cultural change that happens around us. And that's what is important, how the governments are formed, how the administration is done. Somewhere along the line, I have a feeling that Islamic ideology is not compatible with the way democracies are run. Islam has a definite streak of authoritarianism, of autocracy. Democracy is their experiment. So the very vital question comes up: is Islam compatible with the modern concept of democracy, the way we practice it? And is it relevant, or is it outdated? Your thoughts?
This is a question that has been debated by many people over the years, and you can find many Muslim clerics themselves who will say that Islam is completely incompatible with the Western idea, or the now universal idea, of democracy. There are several reasons for this. One of them is historical. You can look at the Islamic world for 1400 years, and you don't find any democracies, with the partial exception of Turkey. And Turkey is a very interesting exception because it was founded, the modern secular state of Turkey was founded after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire in the 1920s as an explicit rejection of political Islam. Turkey was founded by Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, who had great contempt for Islam and thought that Islam was the reason for the decline and fall of the Ottoman Empire, and that consequently he wanted to build a new Turkey based on European secular models that involved an explicit rejection of political Islam. So many people invoke Turkey, or did invoke Turkey until its recent return to Sharia and Islam on a large scale under the presidency of Recep Tayyip Erdogan. But many people used to invoke Turkey as a sign that Islam was completely compatible with democracy, not realizing that Turkey arose, modern Turkey arose, as a rejection of political Islam itself, and consequently could not be seen as an Islamic democracy. it was a rejection of Islam democracy. In any case, Turkey is now rapidly re-Islamizing and imposing Sharia. And so there is no democracy in the Islamic world. And with that exception of Turkey for about 100 years, there never was. This is because of theological aspects of Islam. One is very simply, Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, is described in a hadith as saying, obey your ruler even if he is an Ethiopian with a head like a raisin. Most of the time when that's quoted, people use it to show how racist Muhammad was, that he had contempt for the Ethiopians, for black people in general, and would describe them in this derogatory manner. And that's true. But an overlooked aspect of this hadith is the fact that it declares that one should obey a ruler even in what Muhammad was describing as extreme circumstances. That even if your ruler was this inferior, someone from this race that Muhammad considered inferior, you had to obey him. And even if that was given as an extreme example, then one must generally obey the ruler in all circumstances. And so Islam lends itself to authoritarianism and to docile submission to an authoritarian ruler, as commanded by Muhammad himself. Also, this is paradigmatic in Islam because Allah is envisioned in Islam as the sole and absolute ruler of the universe, whose arbitrary will must be followed in all circumstances, no matter what, without question. And I note that arbitrary is a very important word in this connection, because we read, for example, in the Quran in chapter 32, verse 13, Allah says, I could have guided all men to the truth, but instead I will fill hell with jinns and men. Now that's an extraordinary statement that bears a great deal of consideration. Allah is saying that he could have had mercy on all of humanity, but decided not to, completely arbitrarily. And some people he will torture in hell just because he wants to torture people in hell. Now, of course, that's a monstrous idea and a monstrous view of God. But more importantly, it emphasizes that Allah is an arbitrary and authoritarian ruler who just does whatever he wants without any resistance. And of course, chapter 5, verse 101 and 102 of the Quran also says, do not ask questions. Do not question what you are being taught in Islam, because many people have lost their faith by asking questions. So Islam inculcates ideas of absolute obedience to the leader, because you're not supposed to question, even when the ruler is arbitrary, just as Allah is arbitrary. And so even if you have a despot who is doing terrible things, you have to not ask questions about him, and you have to obey him. And so these ideas are completely incompatible with the idea of one person, one vote, and the law being established by the will of the majority. Also, of course, there are many, many other reasons for this. Another is that the law in Islam comes from Allah. And Muslims brag in apologetics with non-Muslims about how their law is divine law. And they say it's better to obey divine law than man-made human law. Now, that may be actually true if it really were divine law, but it's, of course, just another man-made law under the guise of a divine law. But it has to be just accepted by the Muslim. There is no idea of deliberation or voting or any other kind of consideration. You just have to submit and accept the law of Allah. Now, that's, of course, fundamentally opposed to the idea in a democracy that the laws are subject to the will of the people. As Thomas Jefferson says, the government derives its just powers by the consent of the governed. There's no consent of the governed in Islam. It's all about Allah's will. You just do what he says. So that's another reason why Islam is incompatible with democracy. And finally, I can say in this preliminary statement that Islam denies the equality of rights of various groups of human beings, notably women, who are treated as commodities in Islam, rendered to the status of essentially just slaves to males. There's polygamy. There is the acceptance of the beating of disobedient women in chapter 4, verse 34 of the Quran. Many other indications that women are not equal human beings with men. Consequently, the idea that a woman should have just as much say in how the government is to be constituted as a man is fundamentally opposed to Islam. Also, the idea that non-Muslims should have a say, along with Muslims, is opposed to the idea of Islam. Islam actually teaches that the life of a non-Muslim is worth less than the life of a Muslim. If you accidentally kill a Muslim, you have to pay more in compensation than you do if you kill a non-Muslim. And then there are different gradations of value for the various types of non-Muslims, Jews, Christians, Hindus, so on. And you have to pay a different price for each one. So the idea that every person has a vote that is just as valuable as every other person's vote is fundamentally opposed to the Islamic idea that Muslims are of more value as human beings than non-Muslims. So in all these ways, there is no compatibility between the idea of a secular democracy in which there's non-establishment of a religion and the vote of all people respected because of their dignity as human beings doesn't exist in Islam.
That's a very, 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 very accurate and very hard-hitting distinction that you have drawn. And this is what you also referred to, that this discussion is not something new, and it will continue on because there is a very fundamental challenge there. One of the things that is that the apologists and argumentative genius of Islamic scholars, they point out at the imperfections of democracy in the West and the rest of the world. And thus they justify that their democracy is flawed. They will offer that explanation. But it is also very important to remember that the democracies of Pakistan and Indonesia and Saudi Arabia, they are not the same level of democracy that prevails in the UK, US, India, and other parts of the world. So there is a huge gap between in the two scenarios. But you also refer to a very important point, the Sharia part. See, in the democracies of the world around us, our Bhagavad Gita and Ramcharitmanas, our religious texts, do not make part of the constitution. There is a clear distinction between religion and governance. Even Bible here in America or the Western democracies is not part of constitution as a governing instrument. Although ideologically you cannot abandon that part, but we have clearly distinguished between the two elements. In the case of Islam, I think the problem lies that Sharia is a governing document for social, personal, political, and every single aspect of life. And as a result of which, they cannot distinguish that. It does, in my opinion, that's what puts them into a conflict with the rest of the world. What do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt about this. The idea that Islam gives divine law that comes from the only true God and is applicable to all human beings, and that Muslims are the executors of the wrath of Allah, as is specified in the Quran in chapter 9, verse 14, which says, "Fight them, and Allah will punish them by your hands." This puts Islam in perpetual conflict with the rest of the world, with the non-Muslim world. It's an open-ended and unending war. As the Quran says also in chapter 8, verse 39, "Fight them until persecution is no more and religion is all for Allah." If you have to fight them until religion is all for Allah, that means the fighting never ends until all of us who are not Muslim have accepted Islam or submitted to the hegemony of Islamic law as being the law of Allah. And we've accepted our second-class status that comes from rejecting the law of Allah. So the conflict is constantly misunderstood by governing authorities who think if we make various concessions to the Muslim groups, if we appease them in various ways, then everything will be all right and there will be peace. There will never be peace. There may be peace for a temporary period, but the conflict, because it comes from what Muslims consider to be Holy Writ, the word of Allah, the creator of the universe himself, the conflict will never end.
The conflict will never end, and that's the tragedy, which is what I in my opinion, as we observe now, like the world has transitioned, and in a various parts of the various time span, we know a lot more than we did before. although the arguments can keep shifting as a shifting sand. But there is a definite clash between the freedoms that we enjoy and their rule, which is most driven towards subjugation, driven by punishments as given in hudud. That you chop the hand, women have to produce 4 witnesses for a rape, and a slew of things. I mean, it will get tiring even to refer to those Quran chapters where they say, slay the unbeliever, kill the infidel wherever, do whatever it takes to promote Islam. And the tragedy, I see it from our side of the point of view, is that we are not even demanding and asking for reciprocity. That's what is bothering me a lot more than anything else. That when they migrate, to the various parts of the world, they never migrate to their own 56 countries where Islam is practiced. They come to democracies to experience freedom. And then when they come here, then they demand Sharia and halal and everything else that they left behind to change. What must the democracies do to integrate? Because integration is not a one-way traffic. Integration is both ways. So when you embrace to our societies, you come to our societies, why not embrace rather than be at loggerheads, my way or highway?
That's a very important question.
Thank you.
But it goes, once again, we find the answer, as so often is the case in these kinds of questions. It's all in the Quran. And so the Quran, for example, in chapter 4, verse 100, it says, whoever emigrates for the sake of Allah will find much refuge and abundance in the earth. And whoever forsakes his home, a refugee for Allah and his messenger, and death overtakes him, his reward is then obligatory upon Allah. Now, this is a very important passage because this is the answer to your question about why don't Muslims, when they emigrate, when they leave their home countries, go to one of the other 56 Muslim countries? Because the imperative is to emigrate in the cause of Allah, as the Quran says. To emigrate in the cause of Allah means to bring Islam to a new land, not to go to another Muslim country. That's not emigrating in the cause of Allah. And if you go to a non-Muslim country just to get a better job or something of that kind, that doesn't count either. You have to be going in order to bring Islam in the cause of Allah, going to a new land. And then the reward is obligatory upon Allah. Now, that's very important in the Islamic scheme of things, because the Quran, for a believing Muslim, is a very frightening book, because it promises hellfire, very luridly and repeatedly described, for any miscreant. Now, everybody has committed sins. Everybody has done things they regret. And if you're a Muslim and you believe in all these lurid descriptions of how Allah will make you drink molten lead in hellfire and how your skin will burn off and then he'll give you new skin so it can be burned off, and you're tortured forever in these horrible fashions, then it's very frightening. And you're looking for a way to make sure that you avoid hellfire. And so one of the guarantees of a reward from Allah comes in this passage I read, chapter 4, verse 100, which promises that you will be rewarded if you go to a new land to bring Islam to it. And so this is what we're seeing now with the refugees all over Europe and North America. They're coming and they don't want to assimilate. There was a Muslim leader in Belgium a few years back, Diab Abu Jaja, who actually said assimilation is cultural rape. And the Muslims all over Europe and all increasingly in North America as well are forming enclaves in which Islamic law Sharia is enforced and the law of the land is essentially ignored. And this was only to be expected if anybody had understood what Islam teaches about immigration. That you're emigrating in the cause of Allah, you don't adopt the ways of the new land. You bring Islam to the new land and Islamize it. And this is what's happening now all over the West.
And that brings me to one of the key elements of the Islamophobia bill. I do not know what's going to happen in the Senate now that filibuster thing is going to stand, given the 2 senators of Democratic Party have voiced their opposition to that. So I do not know what's going to happen in the Senate, but one of the key things is, why are the Democratic Party so stuck with trying to appease Islam? This is a political part of it. This is a very important question. I mean, Senator Cory Booker, along with 3 others, they have tabled the bill as a companion bill to the House bill that was passed with 5 or 6 or 7 votes majority along party lines. So that is a question that we Americans must ask, but we are not allowed to ask. The moment we ask, we are categorized as if we are the evil, if not despicable. That's the point which bothers me the most. Like people like you and I, who are indulging in a conversation to bring awareness, we could be slammed and targeted individually, which is where the democracy fails here. So my question is, there was when the 9/11 happened and the Islamic Center was being set up next to World Trade Center, bombed there, and I thought it's there in the Islamophobia bill as well, incitement and propaganda. They indulge in incitement and propaganda all the time. The Texas capture of the Jewish synagogue and the hostage situation is a classic example. Is that phobia? I'm on to ask Ilhan Omar, is that phobia or is it real? So the question here is that, somebody said very nicely the other day, declare, what you call the Wuhan phobia and pass a bill and there will be no coronavirus. Now, that's the issue, to understand that there is no definition of Islamophobia. It's like saying that Wuhan virus phobia is a bill, so it is over. It doesn't. It exists for reasons that we are not even addressing. So, like there is a woman called Dr. Kanta Ahmed. She was on Fox Today. I heard her, and she was attributing American failure to deal with immigration and the fact that we have been totally blindsided by vested interests. So in Democratic Party, what is the justification for Democratic Party to be acting in the way they are acting? Do they feel that all of us are stupid?
Probably, yes. But the idea that the Democrats have is that Muslims are a victim class in the United States. The Democratic Party claims, I am not endorsing this claim, but they claim to be the champions of the downtrodden and the marginalized, those who are discriminated against, harassed, or outright ignored in American society. And so they claim to be the group that brings justice to those people. Now, Islamic advocacy groups in the United States, such as the Council on American Islamic Relations, the Islamic Society of North America, and others, have very skillfully, particularly after 9/11, portrayed Muslims in the United States as a victim class, as victims of persecution, discrimination, hatred, so-called Islamophobia after the 9/11 attacks. And because of that, they have been able to co-opt the Democratic Party leadership into thinking that this is a group like Black Americans or others who are facing discrimination, even racism, although Islam is not a race, and there are Muslims of all races and Islamic jihadis of all races. They even claim that opponents of jihad violence and Sharia oppression of women and others are racists. So by this means, they have been able to gain tremendous influence among Democrats as well as among Republicans also. Although the fact is that there is not widespread discrimination or harassment against Muslims in the United States. There are regularly many more hate crimes against Jews and other groups than there are against Muslims every year. This is not to say that any hate crime is justified against anyone, but the idea that Muslims are particularly victims is completely fictional. Nonetheless, it has become such a mainstream notion that most people on the left and many on the right take for granted that Ilhan Omar was able to get a non-Muslim congresswoman, Jan Schakowsky, I think her name is,
Yes,
to endorse, to co-sponsor the bill with her on against Islamophobia, because she thinks, Schakowsky or whatever her name is, thinks that Muslims are victims and need protection in the United States. But you're absolutely right that the main problem with this bill is that Islamophobia itself is not defined. And most of the bill discusses it as if it were referring to vigilante attacks against innocent Muslims. Now, those are never justified under any circumstances, and everyone is against them. But the bill does not define the concept, because the word Islamophobia is very frequently used not just to refer to those vigilante attacks, but also to refer to any kind of criticism of Islam, particularly even opposition to jihad terrorism. And so the agenda here is not just to protect Muslims against the vigilante attacks, but to shut down any criticism of Islam. And so we see, even after this hostage-taking situation at the synagogue in Texas, that any kind of attribution of the actions of the perpetrator to Islamic teachings, although it's very clear that there is a connection, it will be condemned as Islamophobia and accordingly silenced.
You use the word victim, and somewhere along the line, the whole world knows, everywhere, India included, they have somewhere along the line mastered the art of victimhood, claiming victimhood. I think I call it using the tool of victimhood to draw concessions from all of us. And I remember in one of the CNN shows, a very prominent Indian called Farid Zakaria, in his show GPS, had made a case that the West is advanced, West is prosperous. These people are prehistoric times. They don't know what they are doing. We need to embrace them. We need to embrace them. We need to give them concessions to make them feel as a part of our group. And the only way we can do that is integrate them in our societies on their terms and conditions. That is something which is bothersome. That because if I'm seeking integration, integration is a two-way process. That's the reason why India was home to all persecuted religions for a long number of years, and including Muslims, Jews, and everybody else. And America was called the melting pot. It no longer is a melting pot. America is no longer a melting pot. As an immigrant, you were supposed to imbibe into the culture of America. It's gone. Through the process, I've seen it since 1991, how various Democratic Party leadership have created the class distinction between various subgroups for vote bank purposes. Now that produces a challenge. And that challenge is when the people realize that in democracy, votes matter. And people indulge in the vote bank politics. I see that happening very seriously, which is what is the cause of a challenge in democracies, which these group of people have begun to understand. And the example is the famous Georgia Senate runoff elections in 2020, where Ilhan and Tlaib made an open call for all Muslims to vote for Democratic Party. And I wondered if Hindus had given a call like that to vote for X, Y, or Z, we would have been branded as Islamophobic. So there is a major clash, and I think it is more driven to dominate, subjugate us to the will of what you said, will of Allah. How does democracy deal with that challenge as of now? As Democratic Party seems to have been caught into the grips of that argument. They have virtually adopted the India's Congress Party ideology of appeasing Muslims and pandering to them at all costs, at the expense of the rest. Democratic Party has embraced that ideology as a vote bank politics.
There's no doubt that the idea of appeasement, the idea that if we grant immigrants the right not to assimilate, but not to be part of a melting pot, but to maintain their own traditions, even when those traditions are directly incompatible with American law, there's no doubt that this is just a recipe for conflict, and it's not going to pacify anything. And so the Democrats are completely wrong in that regard, because the Quran teaches that Muslims are the best of people on earth. chapter 3, verse 110 of the Quran. If you're the best of people on earth, and the unbelievers, as the Quran says, are the most vile of created beings, chapter 98, verse 6. And then a member of the best of people, one of the best of peoples, moves to the land of the vile beings. He's not going to want to adopt the mores and customs and practices of the vile beings. He's going to maintain himself aloof as one of the best of people. And if the vile beings think, oh, that's all to the good because that will make them comfortable here and there will be peace, they don't understand that there is a mandate, an imperative within the Quran for the best of people to wage war against the vile created beings and subjugate them and render them an inferior class. So it's not going to create peace, it's going to create conflict. And the conflict is going to come from the Muslims who believe that they have this imperative to fight given by Allah. So the Democrats are only sowing the seeds for future conflict within the United States. This has happened everywhere in the world. Certainly the history of India bears it out. And the history of every other place where Muslims have been bears it out. Wherever Muslims have gone, as I show in my book, The History of Jihad, there's been conflict between the Muslims and the non-Muslims, and the conflict has been started by Muslims.
So the conflict that this is, we have been openly and without apology trying to figure out the path to peace for a community life of integration as living like human beings, part of the process. But as you have pointed out, I believe the challenge lies because the Quran is an instrument of contradiction. Because on one hand, every religious book is a book of peace. So I'm not here to single-handedly say that Islam is a religion of peace. So is Hinduism, so is Christianity. Nobody, practices violence to impose peace. Although, as the saying goes, that you need war to have peace. All those kind of contradictions exist in life. But Quran, I have tried to study, read it, figure it out, just as I have read Bhagavad Gita and understood it. In Bhagavad Gita, for example, there is no mention of religion from the beginning to the end. It's all about humanity. It's all about dharma, as we call it. But in this particular, it doesn't say that go and dominate the rest of the world. It invokes in you to do the best that you can, to adopt a dharmic way of life. In Quran, it is always subjugating others, dominating others. You call up yourself religion of peace, but you have also said, kill the infidel or non-believer. So I am demanding that, why don't we demand reciprocity? Just as when you take the citizenship oath for the US in the United States, you swear by certain things. I will not do this, I will not do this. Why not have a conditionality in democracy that you will leave the cloak of religion elsewhere if you want to be part of my life or you embrace our societies? What is Republican Party doing? Or they are also falling into the same trap of being phobic.
Yeah, the Republican Party is completely useless. In the United States, it's an old adage that we have two parties, the stupid party and the evil party. The evil party are the Democrats and the stupid party are the Republicans. That is, I think, absolutely true in every respect, that the Democrats are increasingly authoritarian. They are against the freedom of speech. They're against free inquiry. They're in favor of jihad violence, or at least they're against doing anything about it or speaking about it honestly, and so many other things. So they're the evil party. And then the Republicans just go along and go out and play golf, and they're the stupid party. So we can't count on either of the political parties to do anything serious about this at this point. There was a time not long after 9/11 that there were some Republicans in the mainstream who were speaking honestly about these issues, but that time is long past. And the Republicans generally don't have any better idea of what to do about this than the Democrats. As a matter of fact, I myself was invited a couple of years ago in 2019 to speak at a Republican group, an actual Republican Party chapter in the state of New Hampshire. And so I went up there, and found that a couple of venues had canceled because the Democrats were lying and saying I was a white supremacist, which was just complete libel, and got me canceled at a couple of places. But the organizer found a third venue, and the event went on. After I left, however, the chairman of the local Republican group was actually fired by the Republican group for inviting me, and he was replaced by a gentleman who had not attended my talk, but who actually apologized for having me speak there, even though he wasn't involved in it. And he apologized not based on any knowledge of what I'd said, because he, as I say, he wasn't there, but just because the Democrats were raising a fuss about it and saying that it was Islamophobic and so on, and that the Muslims in the area were scared, which was total nonsense. But in any case, that's the state of the Republican Party today, not just in that area, but all over the country. So it's a shame, but truth about this issue is at a premium. It's been very much clouded over. And people tend to think, well, if you say that there's a problem, that Islam teaches violence and hatred, then you must hate Muslims. Now, that's a lie, of course. It's just as much of a lie as saying that if you are saying that Nazism is a terrible ideology, then you must hate Germans. It doesn't follow in the slightest degree, but nonetheless, it scares people and intimidates them into thinking that they can't speak out about these issues. And so most people don't. And so it's all advancing without anybody really realizing what's going on.
And that is my problem too, because, you know, this is a real challenge that, you know, in this country, which prides itself about freedom of speech and equality and all that, it all goes out of the window. I mean, think about it like this, that people like you who are talking about as a discussion or bringing out the truth, Ayan Ali Hirsi, for example, I have heard her, I have read her books, and I follow her. She was the one who was telling the truth about Sharia, about Quran, and she got banished from everywhere. But Ahmadinejad, the Iranian president, who was spewing venom against democracy, against there. This is what irritates me, and it really makes me think, am I in a free country? I don't have a freedom of speech here, because we can't even do, one of the freedom of speech thing is to make inquiries, asking questions. So if we are prevented from asking questions by branding us bigots and whatever else, then where is the conversation? I'm not here to kill anyone. I'm here to ask, hey, if you are a freedom of religion, if you have the freedom of religion, you know, where is the practice of it? And you are right, and I see this as well. The Democratic Party has ended up becoming more fascist than democratic. They immediately victimize you and I individually. I was told when we came on my show last time that now you will be under FBI watch. So I said, okay, my status is elevated, that I've given Robert a platform to speak. But that's what is interestingly challenging. It's nothing else but truly sad that a country that prides itself on democratic freedom is now trying to shut us up, all because I am asking a question. This is what is important for us to, you know, I have always said that when will the law of physics operate when it comes to dealing with Islam, equal and opposite reaction? Do you think it is coming? Do you think with the advent of science and technology, so long as we have the platform, that people are now responding? Are they concerned about it? Because, you know, there are Pew Research and other researches. I mean, we can talk, but there's enough number of information available. But I'm talking about more from the impact and implication of what we are doing, whether it's a Democrat, Republican, Congress party in India, or anywhere else for that matter. So if people talk about, look at London, Sadiq Muhammad is the mayor, but they're indulging in Islamization there again. That's a matter of concern. So what must the democracies do to restore sanity in our societies to ensure that everybody is equal in the eyes of law?
Well, I think that's exactly it right there. You hit it. That's what the democracies need to do. But that's what they're not interested in doing right now. And that is enforcing one law for all people and not creating special classes that are not subject to the laws that everybody else is subject to. See, I think the solution is really very simple. If the United States, I can't really speak for India because I don't know Indian law, but I certainly know this to be true in the United States. If the United States were to enforce the laws that already exist on the books right now, the problem of jihad in the United States would be significantly decreased. But these laws are not being enforced. I'll give you an example of what I mean. There was a few years back a man named Siraj ibn Wahaj who was running a training camp in rural New Mexico, out in the middle of nowhere, training children to be suicide bombers. The idea was that they would go into schools and blow themselves up and kill all manner of children and teachers and administrators. This never happened because the plot was foiled. However, Siraj ibn Wahaj was already on the radar of law enforcement because he had entered into a polygamous marriage long before he started the jihad training camp in New Mexico. Now, the authorities did nothing. They knew that he had entered into the polygamous arrangement, but they did nothing, even though polygamy is illegal in the United States. They did nothing probably because Siraj ibn Wahaj is the son of Siraj Wahaj, who is a very famous imam in the United States, who has a great deal of influence and connections with powerful people. So they didn't want to offend Siraj Wahaj. They didn't want to appear Islamophobic. They didn't do anything about Siraj ibn Wahaj's polygamy, and he was perfectly free to go and start this training camp in New Mexico. If he had been arrested for polygamy in the first place, he never would have been free to go start the training camp in New Mexico where at least one child died in the first place. In other words, if we would simply enforce laws regarding polygamy and regarding all manner of other aspects of Islamic law that are incompatible with American law, like female genital mutilation, that everybody always denies has anything to do with Islam, and yet is commanded in a hadith of Muhammad. If the laws were enforced against these things, a lot of jihadis would be caught up in them because they're the people who observe all the Sharia laws. But this is not being done because people are afraid of looking racist and Islamophobic. These laws are not enforced, and then the jihadis are free to go and plot jihads. So I say one law for all people. And if that were enforced, a lot of the problem would go away.
And that's the tragedy of democracy. In India, like you said, that, is the same law. In India, for example, uniform civil code is being talked about. I mean, Prime Minister Modi has been attacked by every single quarter of Western media, including the left liberals, as we call them, for being, anti-Islam. So uniform civil code, which will bring about uniformity of civilian laws in the country, is being told, as written up in Western media and elsewhere, subjugation of Islam, not giving them the privilege. This is where somewhere along the line, the entire argument has got vitiated. The question is, as humans, we are all alike. You have beard, I have beard, yours is salt and pepper, I have white. What's the big deal about it, right? This is where we have drifted away from humanity to practicing religion in a very sectarian way and trying to appease and pander, which has not worked in India. I have said to some of the senators and congressmen who I know that if you want to know the impact and implication of pandering and appeasement, go and visit India and talk to people there. You can't have one-sided policy of integration. Integration is not one-way traffic. That brings me to another subject matter, which is very important. And I noticed that I came to know that CAIR is a very interesting, abbreviation of a larger term, is an organization that is banned by UAE, which is a major political ally of America. And CARE operates in America as if they are the ones who dictate the social and political agenda of this country. What is happening here with CARE? If UAE, which is your partner, Saudi Arabia and others are not, are declaring it as a terrorist organization, what part of democracy allows us to treat them as a victim or give them home to dictate terms and conditions to us about how we must lead our life? Tell me more about it.
The Council on American Islamic Relations is linked to the Muslim Brotherhood, which is dedicated to imposing Islamic law Sharia over the whole world. It is linked to Hamas, the jihad terrorist group in Gaza, and it was actually founded by members of the Islamic Association for Palestine, which has since been banned in the United States as a Hamas front.
Right.
And it was founded in order to further the goals of Hamas in the United States. It was declared an unindicted co-conspirator in an Islamic terror funding case in which charitable donations were given to Hamas. And yet, nonetheless, because it portrays itself as an Islamic civil rights advocacy group, and Muslims are supposed to be a victim class, it has tremendous influence in the American government. And Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, the Muslim congresswoman, have spoken at CARE events. Many, many other politicians have done so as well, wanting Muslim vote. Because of that, the UAE's designation of CARE as a terrorist group has no influence, because these congressmen and these other governing officials are friends with CARE, and CARE promises them Muslims voting for them. That's all that matters to the politicians. So it will never be declared a terrorist organization in the United States. And as a matter of fact, it does have tremendous influence over policy, because it claims to be the primary spokesman for this supposedly victimized group. And so the Democrats, especially, wanting to pander to this victimized group and get its votes, they work with CARE.
This is absolutely sad, because CARE operates with various chapters, various parts of in the United States, and they have fomented many other organizations attacking everybody who is not Islamic. And that is the agenda. Agenda is to dominate the whole thing. This is what is sad. And I'm looking at it from another perspective. There are many people who are ex-Muslims who have left the religion. They call themselves ex-Muslims. But the tragedy is that I came across a statement which President Obama had made, and that kind of bothered me. He said, there is a Islamophobia, there is radical Islam, then there are moderate Islam, there are peaceful Islam. But he made a statement that future must not belong to those who slander the Prophet of Islam. And he made that statement at a UNGA assembly in 2012. Now, President Bush made the statement after 9/11 happened, that Islam is a religion of peace. These are truisms. Nobody is slandering Jesus. Nobody is slandering Krishna. So why does President Obama have to make the statement? It is the teaching that we are adopting in a manner that is inimical to the interest of the rest of the humanity. That's what is being discussed. The modernity of change has to be adopted. That's what is the challenge here. And I feel that my favorite thing is that unless and until we begin to demand reciprocity, and one of them would be that in the Islamophobia bill, for example, they are talking about that those who suffer from incitement and propaganda, they must go for training. I think that democracies must demand of Islamic countries that we must go and teach them the virtues of other faiths, other religions, and other way of life. That's important. If we don't do that, they come here and tell us how to lead our life. So, for example, they come here and they make halal $1 trillion economy. The question is, even the rice and lentils are marked with halal certification, which we by now know that spitting in the food is part of the halal process. How does the West tolerate that?
Nobody knows. The West people aren't aware in the West that these things are happening. There's story after story out of India of Muslims being caught on video spitting into food. In the United States, we have not seen this. And I reported on those incidents, but my website, of course, is condemned as Islamophobic and so on. And so most people don't have any idea that these things happen. And they don't realize the supremacist assumptions within Islam. and the contempt for the unbeliever in Islam that leads to this kind of behavior. They have no idea, because, of course, they are told by Bush that Islam is peace. And then Obama says the future must not belong to those who slander the Prophet of Islam. In Islamic law, slander means saying anything derogatory, even if it's true. So remember that the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which is the 56 Muslim governments around the world, plus the Palestinian Authority, they have been trying very hard to compel non-Muslim governments to adopt Islamic blasphemy laws, which forbid criticism of Islam under the guise of forbidding hate speech. And consequently, that is exactly what Obama meant, that the future must not belong to those who slander the Prophet of Islam. He's saying we should accept the Organization of Islamic Cooperation's demand that criticism of Islam be criminalized. And we're well on the way to this in the West. It's very likely that if we have this conversation in a few years, we could be arrested for it. And this is what Ilhan Omar and the rest of them want to bring about, the adoption of Islamic prohibitions on criticism of Islam in the land of the freedom of speech.
If that is the situation, in remaining minutes that we have, I would ask viewers, if you have any question, you have the super chat option to ask the questions. But if not, that's perfectly fine. We will continue with our conversation. Tell us something about, is pluralism, the experience of pluralistic way of life, is it over, or is it overhyped, or what are we witnessing right now here?
It's not over, but it's in grave danger, because the people who are the ones telling us that we must be tolerant are tolerating a radically intolerant ideology. And if they welcome this radically intolerant ideology, then ultimately the people who believe in that radically intolerant ideology are going to overwhelm the rest of us. This is inevitable. 1,400 years of history bear this out. Why does anybody in the United States think that the American experience of Islam is going to be different from that of the rest of the world everywhere without exception for 1,400 years? It's absurd. It's not as if the people who believe in Islam in the United States believe in a different Islam from the Islam in the rest of the world. It's the same Quran and the same Islam. And so there will be the same conflict between some Muslims who believe that they must impose Islamic law here and those who don't want to live under Islamic law. The idea that it is intolerant and hateful and bigoted to oppose a radically intolerant ideology that is supremacist and wants to subjugate the rest of us is incoherent. And ultimately, the conflict will be inevitable. There's no way that the United States can welcome large numbers of Muslims and maintain itself as a pluralistic society any more than anywhere else on earth has ever done. Look at Egypt. Look at North Africa. North Africa was a thriving center of Christianity. There are no Christians in North Africa now, except for a few converts over the last few years. The whole Christian civilization of North Africa was completely eradicated. In Egypt, it was almost completely eradicated. Egypt was 99% Christian before the Muslims came in. Now it's about 6% Christian. Where did the Christians go? They didn't leave. They're the Muslims who converted because of the restrictions of dimitude that made life so difficult for them under the rule of Islam. So why is it going to be different here? It'll take centuries maybe, but ultimately the same process will happen. Nobody, however, can speak about it because to do so would be intolerant and racist and bigoted. And so the actual people who are intolerant, racist, and bigoted are allowed a free hand.
That's a powerful statement, and I agree with you. It's very important to bear in mind that knowing what we know now, for example, the entire Kashmir Valley it was Hindu, it is completely Islam. Even the last vestiges of Hindus are gone from Afghanistan, is 100% Islamic. Pakistan is doing the same thing. Kashmir, it happened. So that's what the challenge is, that when, in Kashmir, the Islamic people gave the threat to Hindus, convert, leave or die. Now, that's not phobia. Ask those people who have to suffer that ordeal to actually know. And despite that, the world is talking about India being, anti-Islamic. They have prospered wherever they have gone. They have increased their numbers. It's the religious belief of others that has got subjugated. So the question again comes back to the whole thing. Will there be a resistance? I mean, there was resistance to Trump. Will there be a resistance to this kind of ideology that uses the political instrument to bring about religion in the governance here? Is it a real threat? What will happen about that?
I'm actually optimistic. I think that there is a resistance growing. It's not really to this issue, but I believe that there is a growing sense among many Americans that the political and media elites are not telling them the truth, and that there needs to be a break with trusting them in any way. And what form this will take, I don't know, but I do think that there is a growing movement of people who are ready to defend freedom, and that this will involve an awareness of the challenge that Islam really does pose.
One final question. As I bring my sports analogy, I live by the sports analogies, and sports is my big.
Oh, you've lost sound. I can't hear you.
I got it. I got it back. So, sorry. I was talking about the fact that I bring about sports analogy because sports is my biggest coach, teacher, mentor. As the saying goes, if your opponent is continuously beating you, you have a losing record against some team, then you improve your game. Whether it's baseball or NFL or wherever, is there some way that we can play the game better? Because what I'm seeing here is that I applaud Islam from that point of view. They are playing the game much better in our system, using our tools. Freedom is a tool they use. They have the freedom to abuse. They have the freedom to kill, because this is not per Sharia. In Europe, for example, there was a disgusting justification given by the local judges there that if the girl was dressed in a provocative manner, and that's why she was raped, or it is allowed, or things like that. It is pretty bad. So when people are using our instrument of freedoms, rule of law, and governance the way we are our game, what needs to be done to see that we change the rule of the games, change the ball, change the ground conditions, or whatever, to play the game better? It's on us, is entirely on us. If YouTube tomorrow bans you and us, if Twitter does that, if Facebook does that, because they have somewhere along the line have got into the control of those ideologies, that we have to pander, appease, and all that, where do we go from here? How do we play the game better?
We're absolutely right that the social media giants are against us. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Google. They are completely in league with the jihadis and are shutting down any honest discussion of Islam that's critical. There are alternative platforms that are forming, however. As you know, Getter and what's that other one? I've forgotten the name of the other. It starts with a P. Anyway, I'm sorry. You know the ones.
Alternate. There is a Twitter. There is a Twitter counterpart in India called Coup.
Yes, of course, Coup, and I can't remember that one. But anyway, then there's Rumble for videos and others. These things are growing because more and more people are disenchanted with the social media's censorship and the authoritarianism they're displaying. And so that's very true, but also we can play the game better in a strategic way. I've been advocating for years using the left's hypocrisy against it, that they claim, for example, to be for women's rights, and yet Islam is radically misogynistic. And yet it seems to me nobody ever speaks about women's rights in the context of Islam. They're feminists, and they're never challenged on their ignoring the denial of rights for women in Islam. And so there are many ways that we can play the same game they've played against us, actually, in playing against them.
We have to learn to play the game better. And one thing which is happening is you were talking about something like Parler. Parler was another one.
Parler is it? That's the one. I couldn't remember the name. Yes.
So thanks to one of our viewers, she mentioned about Parler. That's right. So thank you, Jayashree. One of the things which I wanted to say is that, people who go to Dubai, they see a totally non-Islamic country. Everything that is happening is against Sharia rule there, right? MBS is trying to change. MBS is trying to change, and he has taken some bold steps. How do you see those changes affecting the Islamic world? Two wonderful countries. UAE, Dubai is fabulous in its own way, the way it has come up with knowing full well that in that territory they don't have oil, they have to do something else to survive. So they have everything. So they are running totally on a non-Islamic principle. You don't think that's the Islamic country at all, Dubai. But there is one practice they have, which is I don't like, which shows signs of slavery, is a complete control over anybody who comes there for work. They seize their passports. They know that it is in a kind of an indentured servitude. But there are winds of change. Is that real or it is cosmetic?
It's cosmetic. In Dubai, in the UAE in general, there have been several cases of women being raped and then being jailed because they were raped, because they didn't have the 4 witnesses to prove that they were the victim. In Islam, a woman's testimony, even if she's the victim, is disallowed in a rape case. And so she says she was raped. There's not 4 witnesses. The accused denies it. And then she has incriminated herself in confessing to unlawful sexual intercourse. And so there have been women who are jailed in Dubai, foreigners as well, non-Muslims, because they claimed they went to the police and said they were raped. So I'm not sure that it's true that Dubai and the UAE in general is completely separated from Islam. Certainly they're wanting to present a very attractive face to non-Muslims and bring in particularly people from Europe and the United States. And I'm sure that they've been quite successful with that. But unfortunately, there's still quite an Islamic character to the way that they behave, even toward foreigners. The Saudis and MBS, he faces a very difficult road because he's going against, if he goes against anything that's established in Islamic law, then he will almost certainly be removed from power and there will be a revolt. And so he has to tread very carefully. He's trying to make the country more attractive for foreign investment. But if he goes too far, he'll cut his own throat, and maybe even literally.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Robert, for educating us and sharing your thoughts. And you are welcome again. One of the things which I wanted to tell all the people who are watching and who will watch later, we have to play the game better. If somebody is trying to beat us at our own game, there is no alternative but to play the game better, or design the rules of the game, redefine the rules of the game. But there is no substitute for an integrated way of life for all people. With these words, I want to thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Have a great week ahead, and we will meet next week very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't